Hi, and welcome to Temple Baptist Church. This is our online Sunday school class. This lesson is lesson number 2 in the Explore the Bible series. Right now we're studying Joshua, Judges, and eventually we will study Ruth. Today's lesson comes from Joshua chapter 2, and this lesson is meant for June the 14th, 2026. As we get started in this particular lesson, the title of this lesson is Amazing Grace. The author wants us to be reminded that God used Rahab, an imperfect person, to accomplish his plans. And just as God had used Rahab, who was imperfect, throughout history, God has also used others who were imperfect to accomplish his plans. God chose Moses and used him. Moses had committed murder. He had abandoned his people. He ran off to hide. And yet God chose him to go back to Egypt and to be the leader that would lead the Israelites out of Egypt. God chose David. David committed adultery. He conspired to commit murder of the husband of the woman that he committed adultery with. And then as well, God chose him. And God was continuing to build and to shape David into the king that he wanted him to be. David eventually penned the words, "The Lord is my shepherd." God chose Joseph, the husband of Mary, to become the earthly father of Jesus. Joseph was confused until the angel met him in a dream and spoke to him and told him exactly what was going on. God has as well chosen imperfect people who became followers, then who became disciples, and then who became apostles to Jesus Christ. Peter was one of those imperfect followers who became a disciple, who became an apostle. Paul as well, who was literally one who persecuted the church and could be put on trial for murder because of his actions against the church, was one that was chosen by God. He was certainly an imperfect person. Paul once said there in Romans chapter 7, the very things that I don't aim to do, I end up doing because of the sin nature that indwells me. All of us are imperfect people because of that sin nature. God's grace abounds to all who will yield themselves to his leadership. God's grace can overcome our imperfections. God was gracious to Joshua. God was gracious, to the Jewish people. God was gracious to Rahab. He was gracious to the 2 spies that went in to spy out the land. God has been gracious to his creation from the beginning of time. God is gracious today and desires for you to know and understand his grace in all things. Now, as we look into this particular study, we begin with verse 1. The lesson, if you have the book, begins with verse 4, but I'm going to begin with verse 1. Let me read these first few verses to you. It says, "Now Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 men from Acacia Grove to spy secretly, saying, 'Go view the land, especially Jericho.' So they went and came to the house of a harlot named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, 'Behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country.' So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, 'Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the country.'" In this the first part of this particular chapter, we find that Joshua commissions 2 men to go across the river from where they were. They were at a place called the Acacia Grove. There they had encamped. God had told them that it was time for them to start packing, that soon, within just a few days, they would go across the river and they would begin to occupy the land. The city that they would first come to would be Jericho. That was top on Joshua's list. He told the men that they were to go there. And when the men went across the river, they found the city of Jericho, and they found a place where they thought perhaps they could blend in. Jericho is the oldest continuously occupied city in the world. When you look it up on Google, you look in Wikipedia, you look in other documented places, Jericho, of all places in the world, is the oldest occupied city in the world. Jericho had great military value. Jericho had military strength with the way that it was built and where it was geographically and strategically positioned. It was a place with high double walls. It was a place that was well guarded. It was a place that could not easily be conquered, and perhaps never would it be conquered except by the hand of God. It was a place that had great economic value. There was the spring of Elisha. There in Jericho is a freshwater spring. It was the largest spring in the area. And so because of the spring and because of the construction of the city, because of its strategical place of where it sat, and it sat up on a hillside, because it was at the crossing of roads leading north, south, east, and west, it had great strategical value. And Joshua saw it, and he wanted to know about that city. And so he sent the men, and as the men arrived, they looked for a place where they thought that they would be able to blend in. They were sent there to spy out, and so they didn't want to make themselves well known. And so they found this place that was owned by Rahab. It was probably some type of a tavern. The Bible makes us to understand that she was a harlot. She was probably what we would call a prostitute. She probably had a tavern, and with that tavern, there were probably rooms available that could be rented. And they not only found this place and probably started asking questions, but they chose to lodge there. It says there in verse 2. The questions that they would ask probably helped Rahab recognize that these were men that had never visited her place before. These were men that, because of their questions, they could have been Israelites. And we don't know how they were dressed. We don't know if they tried to go incognito. But we do know that God had already been working in Rahab's heart and her mind, as well as in the heart and the mind of others, to bring them to the point of being fearful of the Israelites, not because of the power of the Israelites, but because God was with them. And so Rahab recognized these men. She put them in a room, and then when she was approached by the king's men, she took kind action to protect these men. Let's look on here in verses 4 down through verse 7. As Rahab acted boldly, showing grace to these men, and in that boldness receiving the grace of God. It says, Then the woman took the 2 men and hid them. So she said, Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And it happened as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know, Rahab said. Pursue them quickly, for you may overtake them. Then it says in verse 6, But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. And then the men pursued. So her countrymen, the men of Jericho, pursued after the Israelites, or they thought that they were pursuing after the Israelites, by the road to the Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who pursued them had gone out, they shut the gate. And so there it was, the situation. She had moved the men up on the roof. She had lied about their existence. She had lied about meeting them, about knowing them, about understanding that they were Israelite men. She didn't quite know exactly why they were there, but perhaps she had a good feeling as to why. She took bold action because of the conviction that God had already placed in her heart that he was bringing the Israelites. She probably had already heard that God had given them these things. Rahab acted boldly because she believed that God was with these two men, and she believed that God was with these people on the other side of the river. Following God often requires leaving one's comfort zone and stepping out in faith. These two Israelites had to step out in faith to cross the river, to enter Jericho, to begin their journey of spying out the land. Rahab as well had to step out in faith. Not that she was a firm believer in God. We don't understand that from this passage. But that she knew, and she had a belief, that the God of the Jewish people, the God of Israel, was both God in heaven and God on earth, and that he was going to do great and mighty things for his people. And so she took bold action to hide them so that they could not be found out. Let's look at the second part of this lesson. It's entitled A Kind Action. It comes from verses 8 down through verse 13. Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof. She said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord, that is Yahweh, dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you, for the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house and give me a true token, and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sister, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. God's kindness to us helps us to show kindness to others. As we increase in faith, we increase in boldness, and we increase in kindness. Outside of increasing in our faith, we remain people who operate out of fear, and we operate out of self-preservation. Self-preservation verily most often finds avenues of kindness to extend to other people because we want what's best for us, not what's best for them. Rahab acted out of kindness. And she acted out of kindness because she had some sense of belief, some sense of faith, and that was based upon knowledge. There was this knowledge that had come to her, brought to her, I'm sure, by the Lord, as God showed himself to the Israelites so many years before. The story of those things that he had done for them, all of those stories had reached Jericho. Those stories had been shared and reshared. Perhaps there had been people that had met some of the Jewish people wandering in the wilderness from time to time, and they had heard those stories firsthand. However they got there, we do not know. But God used those things to bring terror to the hearts of the people, to make them fearful, to give them some sense of understanding that He was a God that could not be reckoned with. He was a God that would have His own way. He was a God who would, out of His commitment to Israel, give them the land that He had promised. Rahab's faith, we see there, where the Bible says her words, "I know that the Lord has given you the land." And then later she says, "For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31 tells us, by faith, Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe. So it would make us to have the idea that Rahab believed in God, although she was hardly a follower of God. She knew that He existed. She had this knowledge. She knew about God rescuing the people out of Egypt, parting the Red Sea, defeating the Amorite kings on the opposite side of the river. Rahab, as well as many others, had heard, and because they had heard, the Bible says that they had grown faint-hearted, that they would be, like those kings, utterly destroyed. Rahab acted kindly to the men. That was the only option that she had. And she acted kindly because she possibly believed that through her kind actions, then God would show kindness to her and her family. She asked specifically to be protected, not only for herself, but for her parents, her siblings, and for their children, to be delivered from death, because that's what she believed was coming to Jericho. God's acts always demonstrate His character, His power, His presence, and His provision. His acts always demonstrate His character. Let's look at the third part of this study, which is entitled A Daring Escape. This is found in verse 14, 15, and 16. So the men answered her, "Our lives for yours, if none of you tell this business of ours. And it shall be, when the Lord has given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you." And then she let down by rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall. She dwelt on the wall. And she said to them, "Get to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you. Hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Afterwards, you may go your way." And so the men said to her, "We will be blameless of this oath of yours, which you have made us swear." And so there was this daring escape. She let a rope down. They went out the window, down on the outside of the wall. She went with them. They were relying upon God's grace at that particular point for their security. And in every situation, we rely upon God's grace because God's grace leads to security. Both Rahab and the two men, they were completely reliant upon the Lord. They made this pact, but you'll see there in verse 14, where the men said, "It shall be when the Lord has given us this land." Their reliance was on the Lord, and her reliance as well would turn to be upon the Lord. Their agreement was not based upon their own abilities, but their agreement was based upon the faithfulness of God to work according to His ability. We can never rely upon ourselves. We can't really even truly rely upon those that love us or those that we love. Those that we see are trustworthy and faithful, in the end, still have the potential to fail. Always, always, our reliance for every circumstance and situation in our life must be upon the Lord. He is the only reliant one, and we trust in His work, in His faithfulness, His ability to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Let's finish this out and read the rest of the verses in this chapter all the way down through verse 24. I'll go back to verse 17. This last part is called a firm assurance. It says, "So the men said to her, 'We will be blameless of this oath of yours which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land you bind this line of scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you bring your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household to your own home. So it shall be that whoever goes outside the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we will be guiltless. And whoever is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on him. And if you tell this business of ours, then we will be free from your oath which you have made us swear.' Then she said, 'According to your words, so be it.' And she sent them away, and they departed, and she bound the scarlet cord in the window. They departed and went to the mountain and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers sought them all along the way, but did not find them. And so the 2 men returned, descended from the mountain, crossed over, and they came to Joshua the son of Nun and told him all that had befallen them. And they said to Joshua, 'Truly the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands. For indeed, all the inhabitants of the country are faint-hearted because of us.' And so Rahab was assured of God's faithfulness as she bound in the window the scarlet cord that they had given her. They had made this deal. She believed God would honor the deal. They gave her the cord. She bound the cord within her window. She prepared. She didn't wait until the following day. She didn't wait a couple of days later. She didn't wait for 3 days and then put the cord there. She immediately put the cord in the window. That helps us to understand that she was acting on an assurance that God was going to honor in His timing the promise that had been made before her. The men, assured of God's faithfulness, they said to Joshua in verse 24, 'Truly, the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands. For indeed, all the inhabitants of the country are faint-hearted because of us.' So Rahab was assured by God's faithfulness. The men were assured by God's faithfulness. You know, when we, as well as we have seen God work and move over the course of our lives, over time, as we reflect on what God has done in the past, His faithfulness to bring us through every situation, that builds assurance for what God may do in the future. What we've seen God do in the past builds assurance. It builds up our faith so that we can further rely upon God for today, for tomorrow, for the weeks to come, months, years down the road. That's not to say that everything would be perfect. Even in a bed of roses, there will be some thorns. God doesn't promise us a thorn-free life. He doesn't promise us that everything will be perfect according to our understanding. But God always promises that whatever is there, He works it all together for those who are called according to His name and His purpose. And He does so by working it all together for what is good in His sight. A firm assurance. I believe that Rahab had a belief. That belief led her to a bold act. It led her to a kind action. It led her to execute a daring escape for the men, and it led her to have firm assurance in God Himself. We hope, like with Rahab, you have experienced all these things in your own life. We at Temple Baptist Church want to help you with that. Every Sunday we meet for worship at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and 6 p.m. We would love for you to come and join us. We have adult Sunday school at 9 a.m. every Sunday. We have a place for you if you're able to make it. We would love for you to be with us. Now, God bless you. Like and share our videos. Watch some of our devotionals. Check out our website at tbcpb.com. And if you have time, come and visit us here. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.